Welcome to Scoreography, a podcast about the greatest sport on ice, figure skating. I'm Wendy Buskey.
And I'm Adrian Buskey, and this is our Four Continents 2025 recap. It has been a long week of skating stuff happening. Obviously, Four Continents Championships being the very big one that we're covering here. It was also the same week that the Road to 2026 event was happening in Italy, which it seems like mostly a test event to see how the rink was going to operate for the Olympics next year. But it had a pretty nice rundown of competitors, and it seemed like a cool competition that almost nobody saw because it wasn't broadcast in almost any way, with the exception of Judith from Golden Skate and Pirouette Magazine, who was live streaming it, which I think was the only way anybody who wasn't there saw any of it.
I know, and she's usually in the mix zone and was kind enough to take the time to try to give people an actual view on Instagram. So thank you, Judith, for being wonderful and so supportive of the skating community. But yeah, we didn't get to see much of it outside of that. And honestly, with all of the Four Continents stuff, we didn't get to watch much in general. But it was really nice to see Isabeau come back and take silver here behind the on fire Nina Petrokina, who's having her It Girl moment. It was a good competition from what I heard, and it was very cool that they got to test out the Olympic rink and really get to experience what it's going to hopefully be like for all of them to come back next year.
It sounds like it was a lot of fun, and yeah, notably for us in the U.S., this was the first time we've seen Isabeau back on the ice since Skate America. And so to see her show up in second here was very nice. Like you said, Nina Petrokina continuing her It Girl turn is pretty rad. And Laura Naki-Gutman getting third there was really cool too. I honestly don't know a ton about a lot of the other results from that event because we were so focused on Four Continents.
I do know that the men's podium was Kevin Amos taking gold, which is so wonderful to see and hear. And then Nikolai Memola at home in Italy taking silver, and Sota Yamamoto taking the bronze.
Yes, I love that podium, and I love the photo of the three guys together because it is a ridiculous height difference between Kevin Amos to Sota Yamamoto to Nikolai Memola, because Kevin is so small and Nikolai is a giant and Sota is somewhere in between. Yes. And it is really funny, but it seems like a very good vibes podium, and it looked like everybody was having a fun time.
Yes, and Demoget and Lemercier from France took gold in dance, and I believe in the pairs, Katie McBeath and Danielle Parkman from the U.S. took silver right behind Italy's Rebecca Ghiardi and Filippo Ambrosini. So nice group. Really, really nice group.
Yeah, a lot of fun stuff in general. Like I said, we didn't see really any of it. So that's as much as we have to say about that. But Four Continents was a pretty all-consuming event for us as far as just the sheer amount of watch time and the number of competitors, and a lot of interesting stuff happening here, because I think that beyond just some pretty amazing podium finishes, there was a lot of people who were lower down, sometimes even outside the top 10, that still had extraordinary skates that are definitely worth talking about. There was some scoring that I felt was very inconsistent and a few places kind of frustrating.
Which our ISU commentator, Chris, called out in his own wonderfully dramatic, specific way that no one else can.
Well, if I'm out of turn here, then feel free to hunt me down and hang me up to dry. But I really do think there were some problems with that scoring. Yeah, there's definitely some things that I find a little questionable, but overall, I'm pretty happy with the results here.
Yeah.
So let's just dig in here.
We need to start with the men because I need to talk about Jimmy Ma. Jimmy Ma. That's the podcast, y'all. Jimmy Ma.
I mean, I think that the top three men in the men's competition really showed some fantastic performances, a lot of grit, and a lot of really exciting moments. And Jimmy, I think, is going to be forever one of my big takeaways. But before we get to him, I think we should just start at the top. And let's start off with Mikhail Shaidorov.
He was spectacular. I don't know another word. The man came out after Asian Winter Games looking like he hadn't done anything before this. Like he had slept a week. Not that he had just competed less than a week before and then came out and just killed it. His combination triple axel quad sal in the long program literally took the breath out of my lungs. Incredible.
When we watched him at Asian Winter Games, I I think we discussed on our recap of that it really felt like Shaidorov has been focusing more on expanding his repertoire and worrying less about super clean skates and more about figuring out what he could do to find programs that worked with the highest point value and that were maximizing his technical abilities. And it felt like here he really brought that all together. He really figured out how to do those alarmingly good, alarmingly difficult combinations. His spins looked a ton better here.
Yeah, still need work, but definite improvement.
In general, he looked confident, poised. He really handled the mistake at the beginning, not his mistake, but before the free skate, they played the wrong music.
The Godfather.
Yeah, weirdly enough. So he had to take a beat and stop and skate up to the judges and say, hey, this isn't my music. And they had to reset. They re-announced him and he started over. He said afterwards in an interview that he actually felt like that sort of worked in his favor because he did have a little bit of nerves before starting that free skate, especially going in because he was in first. And it allowed him to kind of just let go of that nervousness and just sink into the program. And he performed that free skate completely differently than we've seen him do this entire season. He was way more gentle in the movements, and for as intense as a skater as he can be, it's like a different guy showed up on the ice, and it was really pretty magical to watch.
I just felt like he was taking it step by step. There was no rushing. And yeah, Mikhail is working on his artistic expression and his nuance. That still needs some work, but we're seeing, to what you said about the spins, the same there. He is inching closer and closer towards becoming the full version of his skating. And you can tell that he was working really, really hard to get there. He obviously wants to be a complete skater. And man, he's making strides. And I still stand by what I said earlier in this season. Like, we need to be watching out for him at Milano Cortina. We need to watch out for him at this year's Worlds, but give him another year of dance training, of getting more flexibility, getting more consistency, becoming more of what we saw in terms of taking things step by step like he did at this competition. He is a big threat for the podium at the Olympic Games. I am convinced of it.
So he comes out on top here with a total of 285.10. That is a really strong score. It's still not within those astronomical numbers that Ilya and Yuma put up sometimes, but it is a very strong showing here. He definitely wowed the crowd. He definitely had fun in his panda outfit at the gala as well. And this was a real statement piece from Mikhail. And I think over the past couple of weeks, he's really been making those statements loud that he is a guy that you have to take seriously as a real threat for podiums everywhere.
Take him seriously in the panda suit and outside of the panda suit.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that in our predictions, we both thought that Shaidorov would be on the podium, but we weren't thinking in first, particularly just thinking about the back-to-back schedule and how he looked at Asian Winter Games. Both of us thought that the first spot was going to go to Junhwan Cha. He does come in here in second with a 265. So he's about 20 points back from Shaidorov, but he did deliver some really nice programs and he came back from fourth.
I think if we had seen two clean programs from June, this would have been a razor's edge. June has, at Asian Winter Games, nearly matched Shaidorov's score. So I think that we would have seen nothing between these two skaters. And it makes me even more excited going into Worlds if June can shore up the two mistakes, the one in the short and the one in the free, and perform like he did at the Asian Winter Games. These two guys are going to be really in the hunt at Worlds in Boston in a month, because June has looked better and better in terms of his comfort with his programs all season. He didn't land every jump. He popped his sal in the short. He fell on his quad toe in the free. Everything else continues to look better and better. I just feel like we're seeing like him really getting into flow state, especially in that free program. Like, it's just brilliant.
We wondered how he was going to hold up to back-to-back events. And that, I'm sure, took a toll, because we definitely saw on a number of these skaters that schedule of going right from Asian Winter Games into four continents really wore a lot of people out, and you could see that impact on them. But yeah, June still did a terrific job here. Little mistakes aside, they were still wonderful programs. But like you said, when we started this segment, the story, I think, for a lot of us is going to be a podium placement, bronze, and brilliant set of performances from the US's Jimmy Ma.
It's almost hard to talk about, not just because of the circumstance of recent weeks, but just in general. Jimmy Ma has been that guy for so long, where you just see him have a really killer short and you're holding your breath watching that long program going, please let it be this time. Please let this be the moment where Jimmy comes through. And this was the moment Jimmy came through. It was moving. He was second after the short, which in and of itself was like, what? Jimmy Ma is in second place. And then he came out in the free. It wasn't perfect, but fought for absolutely everything and made it work. And I am so thrilled for him. And the look on his face in the kiss and cry whenever he saw his score and realized he was on the podium, it was really, really special. And seeing in social media all of the beautiful tributes from so many other skaters just being so hyped for him, the photos of him and his Skating Club of Boston teammates, Elisa Efimova and Misha Mitrofanov, just touching, just really, really, really touching.
Well, and Jimmy was there representing for the Skating Club of Boston and particularly for their skaters and coaches and larger skating family that was lost in the plane crash. I wasn't surprised at all to, one, see him representing for them in the kiss and cry, but it was also very clear in his skates that he was skating for them, particularly in that free skate. It felt like that thinking, that remembrance, that honor that he was giving them informed everything that he was doing. And Jimmy showed a level of grace and grit and emotion in that skate that I don't think I've ever seen from him before. You know, we saw it after the fact. So, of course, we woke up in the morning and saw the score. So
and
we
screamed out of my skin.
Yes, and we're super excited, but we didn't see it in real time. So we already knew what was going to happen when we did eventually watch it. If I had been watching that in real time, I think I would have been a weeping mess by the end of both his skate and then seeing his reaction in the kiss and cry.
Yeah, while holding photos of those people that the Skating Club of Boston lost with his coach. It was just very moving and really special.
But this is a guy who has been on the cusp of that kind of greatness for a long time. And to achieve it here and to achieve it so dramatically, given the circumstances and the weight that they're all carrying there, is utterly brilliant. And then you can't forget to mention him absolutely sort of winning the gala because the man understood the assignment. He came out in Seoul, Korea and did a program to Psy, who is a K-pop legend, superstar, and did it magnificently. And Jimmy owned that arena in that performance. It was so fun.
Yeah, outside of hometown crowd people, Jimmy got the biggest ovation, hands down. He might have just gotten the biggest ovation overall. He definitely won the audience over.
I mean, he is a showman. He's got all of the dance ability. He is so charismatic on the ice. And to see him come out in that gala and just do it perfectly, it just illustrates what a great performer he is and how much he loves an audience and loves to reciprocate that energy to them. I was just so happy with all of that.
It was the moment. I do want to give a lot of love to Kazuki Tomono, though. Kazuki was in third after the short program, ended up in fourth in the free, fourth overall, but that was still a really strong result from him. He's had a very up and down few seasons, so seeing him right there in the mix was refreshing to me as such a fan of his, and I really, really hope that next year is his year. He's one of those skaters I've loved for a long time, and he has everything. It's just putting it all together at the right moment that hasn't quite happened in a long time.
It's a little similar with Tatsuya Saboi, who I think we thought, at least one of us had him in our podium picks for this, because he has really had a strong second half of the season, especially when some of the other Japanese men have kind of faltered a bit. Tatsuya had some nice programs here, but they just didn't quite come together the way that they needed to. But a top 5 finish here is not bad at all, although scores-wise, this is where we see a pretty big dip where things are dropping off fairly far back from the leaders.
But in sixth here, Tatsuya still came ahead of Miura, who, to speak of up and down seasons, that is the definition of Cow's season. But I've never seen him so happy. It was refreshing and wonderful to see that even making some mistakes, he had such great humor about it, and just something has changed Miura, and I love seeing you look like you love figure skating again. There was also a great moment backstage in the holding area for people that are in first, second, and third. In fact, there were a few. But Kao at one point was doing a handstand, and I believe it was Chaeyeon Kim and Tatsuya that were holding up his legs. It was hilarious and just a surprise. Like, what's going on?
The guys were having a lot of fun in that waiting room outside of the Kiss and Cry. But yeah, a very different Miura showed up here. He is very often super hard on himself when he's had bad skates. For a guy who is so capable of brilliance that doesn't always put it together, you can just see how crushed he is when he doesn't perform well. And here he just looked like he was in a much better mental place. I mean, a 6th place finish, I'm sure, is much lower than what he was looking for, and he is capable of much bigger numbers than he put up here. But my takeaway, just like yours, is that Miura looked like he was in a very mentally healthy place and that he was really enjoying what he was doing. He was enjoying being with his coaches and with the other skaters, and everything about that made me really happy. So even if the numbers don't reflect it, I think that his experience here was really positive.
It seems like it. But I think it is really worth giving a lot of kudos to Chaeyeon Kim from Korea. He had a good, solid short program, but his free skate was amazing.
Yeah, Chaeyeon Kim really impressed me with his free skate. In the short program, he was 8th, so he was still top 10 to begin with here, but I wasn't super taken with that short program. But I was so very impressed with his free skate. I thought that he showed a level of refinement and poise and just rising to the moment for a young skater who's very much on the come up. I was just so taken with what he did here. And that makes me really excited for the future of Korean men's skating because he is a real talent and really showed up here in a fantastic way. I mean, a 7th place finish at 4 continents at this particular point in his career, I think is really terrific, especially when you consider the level of talent that he was up against. And the free skate was definitely a highlight for me from this event.
And it was obviously a highlight for the Seoul crowd. He's a hometown guy coming out and skating a flawless free skate and really bringing them to the biggest level of excitement I think we saw up to that point at the men's competition. Like, really amazing. And he will be very likely now going to Worlds because unfortunately Seong Lee from Korea dislocated his shoulder, I believe.
Yeah, and had a ligament injury as well, something terrible. So he is probably out of Worlds.
Yes, so we may see more of Hyun Kim very soon.
I want to give a shout out for the other 2 USA competitors here who both were in the middle teens after having rough short programs and were both able to jump up into the top 10. Camden Polkinen went from 16th to 8th, and Tomoki Hiwatashi went from 15th to 9th. So again, while fairly low digits here scores-wise, these were gritty performances that really showed why these guys were here. I particularly think that Camden's free skate really illustrated why this guy is still in competition, still a notable USA skater. He really did have a rough short program, and I was very worried about how the rest of that competition was going to go. And while it was far from perfect in that free skate, he never gave up on it. He pulled it together, and he showed so much skill and grace and musical interpretation. There was just so much of what he was doing there that was really beautiful.
And so much fight. He was skating with total abandon and ferocity. Like, he wanted to show that he deserved to be there. And you could see it. You could feel it. It was really wonderful to see. And it's been a while since I've seen that from Camden. So well done.
And with Tomoki Hiwatashi, he's a skater that I think sometimes can be kind of wild and not fully in control of his performances. And I think here we saw him kind of pull that in, tighten things up, and get the job done. And I'm just really excited for him. His season is finished now, but I think a top 10 finish at 4 continents ended it on a nice high note. And all 3 of the American competitors were in the top 10, which for us as Americans is pretty awesome. And then, a 10th place finish for Roman Sadowski. So he did land top 10 here. Pretty uneven skates overall, but still fairly solid. I do want to hit 2 other performances that I took away as some of my favorites from the men's event. Even though neither of these guys landed in the top 10, I think these are really worth calling out. Canada's Matthew Newnham, who was the replacement for Wesley Chu at this event, who had like next to no notice that he was even going to be here. He lands in 12th overall, but he was 7th in the short, and he was the second guy to skate.
Yeah. His short program was surprising to say the least. It was so solid, so calm, very confident. I don't know what I expected, but certainly not that. And I was super duper impressed.
Yes, it was terrific. And the way that that performance held him in the top 10 through the short and got him up to 12th. I mean, for a guy that I think had to have been going in with very little expectation, he really did some impressive stuff. He doesn't have quads right now. Sounds like he used to before some injuries that have held him back for a while. And so I'm hoping that he can really use this as a springboard towards getting him into next season.
That said, while Canada, as far as I know, hasn't made it official, I do think Roman has done enough to get the nod for Worlds because they only have one spot. And with Wesley Chu having withdrawn here, I feel like the road is paved directly to Worlds for Roman.
Yeah. Then my other favorite program from the men's event was the performance from Yusheng Li from Chinese Taipei. He was 10th in the free skate, 14th overall, but he skated to a really nice version of Eleanor Rigby in his free skate and absolutely delivered a beautiful, clean program that thrilled the audience, was an amazing job for him, and was one of my favorite performances here.
He was delightful. And again, very similar to Matthew, complete surprise to see something that strong from someone that you would not necessarily have expected it from at this level of competition. So incredible job. Absolutely incredible job.
I was not familiar with his game, but now I'm going to have to pay attention because I was so thrilled with what he did here.
Well, let's move on to the pairs because I think we were both correct with our predictions here because you can correct me if I'm wrong. We both are pretty confident that Riku and Ryu from Japan were going to take it. And my goodness, did they ever?
So we both predicted the Japanese team on top and also Deanna Stellato-Dudek and Maxime Deschamps in second. I believe you had predicted Leah Pereira and Trent Michaud in third. So you called this podium entirely. So well done there. But yes, this was Riko Miura and Ryoshi Kihara looking like they did a couple of years ago when they were the dominant team that won Worlds and won 4 continents.
Maybe even a little better because they look like they're doing programs that are so different. I like their material. It's not that I think that it's necessarily the best thing ever for them. I just think it's the best thing for them right now. It was refreshing to see them choose 2 pieces that were just a little more intense and a little harder rather than soft because we've only seen that soft side of them, which I do love very much. But here they were so fast. Everything wasn't 100% perfect, but I like that because they ended up with a 217.32 as their total score, which is the second highest for anyone this season. And it really means that their ceiling, since they made a few errors, is higher. So it puts them in great position going into Worlds.
This is where Haas and Volodin should be a little worried because I think Haas and Volodin at their best have scored right around that same total.
218 something.
Yeah. Miura and Kihara do have a little bit higher of a ceiling, and I just feel like they have been generating momentum going into the end of this season. I like that Paint It Black program a lot. I like the darkness of that. And because they are such happy, soft kind of personalities, and then seeing them do something like that and having it work so well, I really enjoy that a lot. We've been in love with this team since we saw them at the Olympics in 2022.
Unabashed love.
Yes. And seeing them put it back together here and really nail it. One of my favorite moments, though, is the end of the free skate because they end up turned the wrong direction. And so they finish out of their final move facing away from the judges. Yes. And then Riku realizes it and she does this kind of little bouncy step where she just turns them around so they're facing the judges again. And she starts laughing while Ryuichi looks embarrassed, and it's so funny. And you see Bruno cracking up on the boards when it happens.
Yes.
It's so good. I loved seeing Bruno and Megan Dumel both in the kiss and cry with them here.
Loved that.
I was so happy for them. This was a reclaiming their championship here and just looking so much more like they did before injury sidelined them for so long. So yeah, I'm really excited to see how they look going into Worlds.
Their confidence is just really what I saw, especially from Riku. Ryu, for a while last season, especially, even though he was the one who was very seriously injured for a while, he was the one who always sort of looked like he was holding things together for both of them. And so I loved seeing a very focused, energized, seemingly just in a really good mental place, Riku. There was a positive energy about both of them that I just hadn't seen in a while. And I loved the kiss and cry moment where they got their free program score that they obviously did not expect to be as high as it was. Just find it online. It's hilarious.
I mean, they look like anime characters. The faces that they pull are straight out of a cartoon. It is amazing. But what you were saying there about Riku, I think that Riku must have really been putting in the work on the singles elements.
Yes.
Because when they went into the side-by-side jumps, I don't think I've ever seen her look more confident in those. There was no hesitation. It never felt like she was worried going into them, and they just delivered on those.
Yeah, and even though she singled one of their axles in a sequence, in the past, it always felt like something like that would throw her, and it didn't. She kept the course and kept going, so loved everything about that. Also had massive love for especially the free program from Deanna Stellato-Dudek and Maxime Deschamps. If you want to talk about seeing the old versions of them come back in a new way, I feel like that was their free skate. It was like they rediscovered themselves.
This whole season, they've had really strong short programs, but their free skates have been pretty wobbly, and they haven't been able to figure out why that hasn't been working. Here it kind of reversed. The short program kind of let them down a little bit and dropped them into fourth. But when they came back so strong in the free skate, it seemed like whatever had been holding them back in that program, they finally figured out how to put those puzzle pieces together and make it work.
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw Maxime talk about because they were in fourth and they were a little befuddled, confused by that short program not working as well as it was, that frustration almost led them to allow themselves to open up and be totally free in that free program, as opposed to the tightness, the hesitation, the nervousness kind of that we've seen them have all season. For the entirety of the season, I've just sort of felt like every time we saw them going into their side-by-sides or into a throw, there was just this little bit of hesitancy. And I saw it again in the short program here, where they were a little slower than usual. They were a little bit timid is the only word that comes to mind. In their free skate, they just looked like them. On fire, going for everything, nail it or don't, you were trying, and nothing was going to hold them back. So even if there was an error here or there, they just kept muscling down and just going for it. And in the post-competition interviews, they were talking about, we finally feel like we're back. And it was just lovely to see.
And they were just about 6 points back from Riku and Ryushi. That is a closable distance with cleaner skates. And I think that they know what they need to do now going into Worlds to fix all of that up. But just seeing the gratification on their faces when they finished that free skate, when that thing finally worked, it seems like the layout came together, whatever changes they made, whatever emotional change they made, it finally clicked. And so I'm just hoping that they can carry that into Worlds.
Same. But if I'm being honest, I think my favorite program of the whole pairs event belongs to Leah Pereira and Trent Michaud. They're short. I loved. I was actually kind of disappointed that they weren't scored a little better in it. I know I'm not a judge. I don't know all the intricacies, but I just felt like they were just a little underscored. I thought they were spectacular here, and I was just so impressed to see them, to use Chris's term, hold their nerve in the free skate and stay on the podium. It was just thrilling, and I love the come up for this team.
Ever since we saw them make some pretty dramatic improvements at the Canadian Nationals, we've been wondering when this team was going to kind of bubble over and really jump above their previous station. And that's what they did here. I think this is a huge step forward for this team at this level. They are a good 12 points back from the second place, so there's still a range for them to get higher up. But this is just a remarkable come up for this team. And you called it really well from the preview episode, because they looked amazingly put together considering the challenges they had coming into this event. Because immediately, basically upon landing, Leah got sick for like a full day and could not get on the ice at all. And Trent's bag didn't show up when their plane landed, so he didn't have all of his gear. So their first day there was a total mess. And they bounced back from that in such extraordinary fashion. I think it is a real testament to their partnership and to their professionalism and their determination that they came out and did as well as they did. And I agree that short program was one of the absolute highlights of the pairs event.
And only about, a point and a half behind them were Ellie Kim and Danny O'Shea, whose short program wasn't perfect, but was really strong. Their free skate let them down a bit again, but still was significantly better than what we saw at Nationals. So overall, fourth place here for them with a 196.94, I think is still really strong. They go home with a small medal for the short program, which is great. This is a very helpful step towards Worlds for them.
What Cam and O'Shea proved here again is that even though some of those landings and stuff still don't quite work the way that they need them to at times, there's so much intricacy in their programs, there's so much quality in their performance that they get a lot of performance value and PCS scores because they're really doing a lot of stuff that a lot of the other pairs teams aren't. They're informing those programs with a lot of other elements they've done since the beginning, because early on, as Ellie was just trying to get those pairs elements together, they had to just kind of make everything more complicated and refine everything so they could milk every point that they could out of a program. And now I think that what you see is that really helps them when they have some struggles. And then if you watch them in the gala, they're just out there to prove that they can do a bazillion terrifying things in electrifying fashion, because they are really a performance team in a lot of ways.
Yes, they are definitely a show team. They are amongst the people that I wish that skating shows in the US were still much more popular, because they would be huge in those arenas, because they're crowd pleasers for sure.
Now, if we want to get into one of the first places where I have some arguments with the scoring, when we look at fifth place and we see Alyssa Efimova and Misha Mitrofana from the US, they come into fifth here with a 192.07, so they're about almost 5 points back from Cam and O'Shea. But I really think they got underscored in the short, because by nature of the draw, they ended up pretty early in the skate order. And as we always see at these things, people who skate earlier tend to get lower scores. And it is a frustrating aspect of how the momentum factor into the later skates works in scoring here. And I think that they just didn't get some of the points that they should have for how good the short was. But overall, for them, this is still a really good outcome at Four Continents.
Between the draw and their previous year's international rankings, they were very early. And that does suck on a lot of levels. The judges have to leave room, to use that ugly, ugly phrase that we all know. It's a bummer, because I agree. If I'm being honest, I don't really agree that Efimova and Mitrofanov were behind that far from Ellie Kim and Danny O'Shea in the short. In the free, kind of the same story. I think they're just better than they're getting credit for yet. They still have room to grow for sure, but considering the trajectory they've had already, I am really, really hoping that Elisa's citizenship comes through in some miracle before the Olympics, because I think that they are the ones to watch from the US.
And then the rest of the pairs event, I mean, I think you get a little bit of diminishing returns after this. A lot of the other teams had a ton of struggles. I mean, there were still some nice skates and definitely some teams that I'm really looking forward to seeing grow over time. I think particularly the Japanese team of Nagaoka and Moriguchi. I like that team a lot. They had some struggles, particularly in the short here, but I think that as we see them grow, there's a lot of good stuff in the future for them. There was a really unfortunate set of performances for Audrey Shin and Balazs Naj. I mean, we talked a lot about how this was the hope for them to kind of start making that push for international. And I think particularly their free skate was kind of a disaster. And I felt so bad for Audrey afterwards, because you could tell it was crushing. Obviously, a lot of stuff just didn't work in that free.
That's where we saw their inexperience coming out. Inexperience in the fact that she's only been a pair skater for 9 months. I appreciated the social post I saw the next day saying something to the effect of, it's only the beginning.
Yes.
So that's the thing to keep in mind. I think most teams in some capacity always have to have a moment like this so that they can grow and get better. They just don't always do it on a stage this big. It's devastating, but at the same time, I hope that Audrey and Balazs just take it as fodder to just come back stronger next year.
Yes.
All right. That said, let's talk about Korea's national hero, Chaeyeon Kim.
So as we get into the women's event here, this was a hotly contested event because there was a powerhouse list of women in this competition. Some of them who you might think of as a little bit of the second string from some of the powerhouse countries, because there were several big names that weren't here, because that tends to be what happens with four continents. But definitely not the case with the winner, Korea's Chaeyeon Kim, who really delivered on home ice in front of the Seoul, Korea crowd. Particularly that free skate was pretty amazing, especially for somebody who I was not certain was going to stay on her feet once it was over, because she looked so tired after it. You know, she just won Asian Winter Games. And so she had back-to-back big competitions with a lot of pressure on her shoulders, and she carried all of that so magnificently. There is some scoring quibbling I want to make here in a minute, but I don't want to diminish it all over what a thrill it was watching her win here on home ice.
No, she was absolutely magnificent. That free skate showed so much more confidence, growth. It was just so impressive. Like, I saw a tweet from Jackie Wong at Rocker Skating talking about the visible, huge improvements that we've seen just in this season from Chaeyeon. And she already started at such a strong, high level to come as far as she has, so that when I was watching her free skate in real time live, I was never nervous. From the moment she landed her first double axel and I saw how deep her knee was on that running edge, I was like, she's fine. Even if she makes a mistake, she's so calm. It was really impressive stuff.
You want to talk about a wild difference in experiences during that free skate, because we were watching that one live. And like you said, you were sitting there utterly confident, and I was a ball of anxiety. I love Chaeyeon Kim. From the beginning of the season, she has been my pick for the world champion this season. I've been very much on the Chaeyeon train this whole time, even though the Grand Prix season didn't work as well for her. She seems to be peaking late, which is amazing. But yeah, I was absolutely terrified going into that, just because we had also just seen a pretty horrendous free skate from Mona Chiba that knocked her off the podium. We'll get to that in a minute. And I felt so bad after that was over. And then to see Chaeyeon just shake off that energy and really take it home was amazing. I do think that there was still a little bit of the issue that we saw from Asian Winter Games, where it seemed like she was so game-faced that she was not putting as much personality into those programs as we have seen at other times in the season. And especially considering how exhausted she looked afterwards. And if you stuck around to watch the medal ceremony afterwards, there were a couple of times where I was afraid that Chaeyeon Kim was going to literally just pass out, like literally just fall over from the podium. In our living room, I was like screaming. I was like, Sarah Everhart, be ready to catch her, because like it just looked like she was going to go down. But I am not surprised to see her win this, because I think we both picked her for the win here.
I think I went with Mona.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay, so points for me on that one.
Yes.
But yes, absolutely terrific. Really beautiful showing in the gala as well. Her La La Land program is so delightful.
I stand by. I think she needs to hold on to that program, that dress, and that music, and reinterpret it as her Olympic long program. It looks perfect on her, and all that stoicism that you were talking about that we saw in competition, in that gala skate, she is warm and open and inviting the audience in, and it's like a completely different personality. I think it could take her really far. I think it could take her to the Olympic podium.
We've got a couple of surprises in the second and third place. I will say the third place you did predict, but we did not have Brady Tennell getting back up here to silver on our prediction list at all.
No.
Especially making a jump from fifth place to second. Now, after the short program, it was essentially a virtual tie for like 4 places from like third to sixth. But Brady really displayed that incredible professionalism and composure that she has here. And I actually thought she was underscored in the short program. When we look at some of the scoring during the short, a lot of people got called on under rotations and cues, and then other people didn't. Mm-hmm. And that was a place where, particularly after the short, I was a little frustrated on the placement between Chaeyeon Kim and Mona Chiba, because Moni got called on some cues that Chaeyeon also had but didn't get called for.
And yeah, weren't even reviewed. And I love them both equally. I think they're both extraordinary skaters. This is nothing against either of them in any fashion. It's more that I just think the margin between them should have been hardly anything, not 3.5 points or whatever it was. It was certainly a sizable difference that felt unfair. I think the way Chris in the commentary booth called it was, it felt like if you're going to be as pedantic as you are with Mona Chiba and those under rotations, you should probably also call those on Chaeyeon, because their jumps looked virtually the same and they were the same jumps. So if that had been a difference in composition scores, where it's just like a matter of maybe they just saw things in what Chaeyeon was doing versus Mona that they just preferred, fine. But those two calls just felt weird.
And there were a few of those sprinkled through the top 10 here, where there were just places where it seemed like, okay, somebody's getting called this. And we know that this sport and the judging in particular, you never want to end up with the reputation as somebody who under rotates, because then you almost get everything under review because the judges just expect you to do it. And the people who don't do it very often seem to get away with it sometimes when nobody's paying attention. But I did think that Brady got called on a few things that didn't look any different from some of the people who didn't get called as well. So I don't know that it would have made an enormous difference overall, but it might have flipped her up to being in 4th or 3rd after the short program. But regardless, she made that big jump into that silver position. At 2:04.38, she is well behind Chaeyeon Kim's 2:22.38. But this was a terrific showing for her, and again, just showed a veteran performer who knows how to rise to the occasion.
Yes. But as you mentioned earlier, I did call the 3rd place finish for Sarah Everhart, which I really thought I was going to be wrong about when she fell behind Brady. But then we saw an unfortunate skate from Mona Chiba, as you mentioned, in the free, and she ended up on the podium anyway. And talk about someone with grit. Sarah Everhart does not yet have any of the emotion on her face during those programs, unfortunately. It'll get there. I believe we will see that soon enough. That said, we saw amazing jumps, incredible, and you could see, maybe for the first time in that free skate, her nerves.
Yeah, I've never seen Sarah Everhart nervous before, but it was obvious that she was there.
Always so chill and focused. This one, you could feel the nervousness. And all that did was, I think she was on the cue on 1 or 2 jumps. Everything else was still great. She came through in the clutch. And I feel like that is the story of Sarah Everhart. She comes through in the clutch. And I think she really made it a very strong case for being moved into that world position spot over Isabella Vito. I say probably fairly controversially.
Well, I mean, notably, we just saw Isabeau return at the Road to 2026. I think she scored something like a 185.
185, 186, somewhere in there. But she also wasn't, her team had told her to not do the triple triples. They wanted her to go clean. So she had watered down her content to match that. So that score was pretty much as good as she was going to get because she had taken a lot of the difficulty out of her programs.
Yeah, and that was definitely a competition with a lot less pressure on it than here.
Yes.
But very worth noting that Brady got a 2:04.38 and Sarah got a 200.03. Both of them scored over 200 at a major international competition and looked great doing it. I just don't know that Isabeau's the right choice to send to Worlds when 2 of your other U.S. women are doing as well as they are. So that's more of a question as we get closer to our Worlds preview, but it's definitely something I want to put in the pocket. I don't want to forget, though, that Sarah Everhart's gala program was really something interesting to me. One, fantastic dress. That color, that sort of bronzy brown, copperish, whatever it was.
Looks great on her.
Yeah, totally works. But 2, that program is very different from anything else that we've seen choreographically and just emotionally. And while she still isn't fully expressing a complete range of emotions on the ice, that really gave me an insight into what she's going to try to do next season. And I hope that she does because it looked terrific and I was really excited about that.
I also want to talk about our 4th place, as Chris put it, coolest woman at the competition.
Yeah.
Alyssa Liu, who was only like a 1.5 points off the podium, which has to hurt because really it was just that triple salchow that she doubled in the free skate. I think if she had done that jump, she would have gotten that extra bump and been on that podium. And not to take anything away from Sarah Everhart, but that one has to be just a little like,
She might have even squeaked out Brady if she had that one element.
I don't know if that would have been enough, but maybe. Regardless of any of that, Alyssa Liu was magnificent in both the short and the free, almost perfect with some cues and an under rotation. I think she was also a little underscored in the short, similar to Brady. That said, I thought she was exceptional. There was a between groups conversation that Chris had with Alyssa that reminded you why she is such a great person to have on Team USA. She is just so fresh and fun, and she brings lightness to the whole thing. And she takes the sport seriously, but obviously doesn't take herself seriously. And it's such a delight to see her every single time.
When we talk about that it girl factor, Alyssa Liu has it in such enormous fashion. It was clear the audience responded enormously every time that she was on the ice, every time that she would make an entrance. She definitely knew how to work the camera and the crowd every time that she was announced. And the U.S. landed 2, 3, and 4. I mean, let's take a look at something here that 1, 2, 3, and 4, no Japanese women in it.
Which is shocking.
In a season where the Japanese women have absolutely dominated the podiums at most events, this is the first time I think that we haven't seen any of them on the podium. Now, Mona Chiba, had she had her regular kind of skate, would have definitely been up there. Regardless, this is a pretty wild outcome. And for the American team to land in 2, 3, and 4 without their two essentially marquee skaters, Amber Glenn and Isabel Levito at her top of her game, neither of them being here, all three of these women showing up so well, I mean, that bodes so well. And they all skated clean. I mean, if you don't consider pops or whatever,
or under rotations or whatever, but we're talking about falls, no falls.
Yeah. These were 6 really nice programs from the U.S. women. And it just feels like U.S. women's figure skating is back.
It felt that way. It really did. But speaking of Japan, our next 2 skaters are from Japan and were people that I thought had a better chance of getting on the podium than unfortunately what they did. Wakaba Higuchi. Obviously, she is one of the best. Like, she's just an incredible skater. Her short program just didn't work as well as we've seen in earlier parts of the season. She came back beautifully in that free skate. One mistake that was really noteworthy. Other than that, brilliant, so intense. Like, I felt like she was more open and free in her footwork. And I know she's been talking about wanting to get to that point where she's really in the music and not just thinking about the next jump she has to do or spin or whatever. I take this as a wonderful step towards Worlds for her. And also just showing that after a short program, she's not going to come back defeated in the free. She's going to come back and fight. I can't wait to see her again. I just love that we have a Wakaba back in the situation, but I am bummed that she wasn't a little closer.
She looked less secure going into these programs. She looked a little bit more nervous, a little bit more tentative, a little tighter. It wasn't the version of her that we've seen at other events, but she still came away with a 195.16. That is still a strong score.
It is.
I mean, when you look at the top 7 here, everybody in the top 7 is 193 or higher. Earlier times in the season, a lot of the complaints were that, women's figure skaters were just not racking up decent point totals at these events. 4 Continents, I think, resets that a little bit, particularly Chaeyeon Kim's 222.38.
Yeah, second highest senior women's scorer of the season.
And then we've been talking around her here, but Mona Chiba, who was in second after the short program and had a brilliant short program, and I honestly think should have been in first after the short, even as much as I love Chaeyeon. If they'd been called the same way, either she had not gotten called on those cues the way Chaeyeon didn't get called, or if Chaeyeon did get called, I think they would have at least been a little closer, or it might have flip-flopped a little bit. But, man, things just came apart in that short program. I have never seen Mona Chiba have a program like that. I wasn't even sure that I'd ever seen Mona Chiba fall before.
I mean, to be fair, there were some Grand Prix last season where she looked a mess. And I say that with all love.
I have goldfish mind, so I don't even remember any of that.
I mean, she had 2 pretty big falls here and other mistakes throughout. For me, it wasn't even the falls. It was just after the first fall, you could tell that she was uncomfortable or in pain. And from that point on, all of the beautiful flow and incredible positions that she usually has were all tight or looked off. I was just couldn't wait for it to be over because I wanted to make sure she was okay.
I felt so bad watching that free skate, that fall. When she gets up, the grimace on her face, she's so clearly in pain. It changes everything about her body movement. I'm so impressed that she finished that program.
Yes.
Because when she got done, I wasn't sure she was going to be able to stay on her feet, just getting up to do her bows. And she literally fell into her coach's arms afterwards because she could barely stay up anymore. I haven't seen any update after that on how she's doing. I'm hoping she's okay and there wasn't any kind of serious injury, but it was really scary and really unfortunate. And she still landed very close behind Wakaba, really on the strength of her short program.
What was nice to see is continued success from Sofia Simidolkina from Kazakhstan. She was 8th in the short, which I actually thought was, again, underscored, but 6th in the free. And then 7th overall. She looked really strong.
This is a skater to keep your eye on because I think that we were really first seeing her at university games and then at the Asian Winter Games and now here. And every time we're seeing her, she just has such confidence on the ice. Her jumps are terrific, but there's a lot of flow and some really beautiful musical interpretation going on there. For an 18-year-old, there's a lot of maturity in her skating. And she's in 7th with a 193.37 here.
That's a big score.
It is, yeah. And then, it drops off a little bit, not intensely, but like about 10 points back into 8th, we saw a really gutsy set of performances from Haeyeon Lee. Coming into here in front of a hometown crowd, but after having very little of a season, her performances here, while far from perfect, really illustrated why she is a former Four Continents champion and somebody who has been such a promising skater all along. There's definitely some work to do to get back up to that level, but I think particularly that free skate was showing why she is as notable as she is.
There were obvious nerves in the short. In the free, I felt like she had something to prove, and maybe even more so in the gala, where she did 7 jumping passes, I think you counted.
She did a full free program in the gala that was gorgeous. And outside of popping one jump in that gala, I mean, she was doing combos. And again, I think it was a statement piece.
It felt like a remember that I belong here, and also an opportunity because she's had so little of a season. Anytime to skate in front of a crowd, whether it's competition or not, is going to help her prepare for Worlds. I think she was taking advantage of the situation.
And also, I mean, in galas, we've typically seen Haeyeon do things that are a little bit more cheeky and fun. And this was a nod towards like Korean culture and was a much more mature kind of program. So I kind of wish that she would have skated that as her competition piece because I think it felt stronger than what her actual free program was. I was really impressed with Asen Yun in the short program. She comes in here in 9th, just a shade behind Haeyeon Lee, less than a point. And it's really because her free skate came apart.
But she really fought all the way through that free skate. It did not go as well as she wanted it to, obviously. I mean, she landed in 10th in the free, but she never gave up. She was working for every single point in that program. She obviously wanted to give as much, especially to that crowd, as she could. It was just a very gutsy performance.
Yeah, I think that this sets her up well going into next year. And it just felt like, we were talking about how like it felt like US figure skating was back. I think that after kind of a rough year or so for the Korean program, it just feels like now they're settling into their talent and you have sort of a new wave coming through here. And this makes me really excited for Asen next season.
Well, she's going to be at Worlds too, so we're going to see her again very soon.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so that's exciting. Yeah.
In 10th, and I'll let you speak to it because she's one of your faves, Sarah Maud Dupuis.
Yeah, a top 10 finish here for Sarah Maud is great. I do think she finished in the top 10 last year, and maybe even 9th. I can't remember exactly what it was, but Sarah Maud, I think, is always kind of your dark horse Canadian because, she doesn't always have the technical threshold that, say, like Maddie Schizas has. But this season, we've been seeing her sort of come into her power a little bit more. These programs work really well on her. There's a lot of energy in these skates, and you can feel that she likes the programs that she's skating, and she's really putting herself into them. And, while you are seeing a pretty big score drop off at 178.36 versus, the top women here, And definitely the short program didn't go as well. She managed to hold on to 10th place even after having 12th in the free. These were still strong performances. And I think that her coming away as the top Canadian woman at this event is a pretty big deal for her.
It's a pretty big deal, but it does make me nervous because the version of Maddie Schizis that we saw at Canadian Nationals needs to be in Boston. Because if Sarah Mode has any chance of going to the Olympics next year, Maddie's got to get 2 spots. Because unless Sarah Mode has a big come up in the next season and Maddie completely falls apart, if they don't get that one extra spot, it's going to be hard to get it away from Maddie Schizis at this point. And I really want Sarah Mode to be able to go to the Olympics next season. So please, Maddie, go there, be your best self, and bring it home for Canada.
Let's do a couple of other honorable mentions here further down off the top 10. In 11th place was Rino Matsuike. She had a real struggle in the short program, which is not terribly surprising because that's been sort of her story through the season, is kind of a tough short. I think it had her in 15th, 16th or 15th after the short program. And then she comes back beautifully with the free skate. Here, the free didn't work quite as well. She had a couple of jumps that didn't come together quite the way that she needed to, but it is undeniable that she has some of the most beautiful and effective skating skills of any skater out there. Like Chris was just enthralled.
Yes.
Again, the ISU commentator, I think as a skater himself, it seems like she's a skater's skater. When you see other skaters talk about her edges and her footwork sequences, they cannot get over the quality that she gets, her lack of crossovers because her edges take her so fast and so far across the ice. She is just lyrical and lovely and unfortunately outside of the top 10 here, but is still just magnetic.
In a totally different way, I do want to give a quick shout, though, to Tara Prasad from India. She had one of those long programs that you dream about where everything just clicks. She went clean. And yes, she had under rotations and it was not an artistic program, if you will. That said, I think it was in the sense that it meant something to her and you could feel the emotion throughout it that that program was important to her. There was something about the last moment and her sitting on the ice, just looking kind of stunned almost to the level of being outside of her body. It warmed my heart. So I wanted to give a big shout and kudos to Tara Prasad for what a wonderful competition.
Well, and we haven't really seen Tara Prasad in a year or two. I thought that she was retired because I could remember her posting something on Instagram a year or two ago, basically saying that it sounded like she was stepping away from competitive skating. And I think she might have actually been at Asian Winter Games, but we didn't see her at that. Yeah, so I was just happy to see her back on the ice. But I think, the way you phrase it there, like an out-of-body experience, I really do think that's kind of what that free skate was. I think she almost disassociated from herself and just let her training and her body take over. And when she got done, it's like she came back to herself and didn't even know what had happened. She looked utterly shocked in the kiss and cry where she was sitting with her coach, Jeremy Abbott, a very notable skater in his own right.
Exactly.
And yeah, seeing a really nice score and seeing a just a terrific performance from her there. I mean, she landed in 16th. It wasn't, a big money maker, so to speak, but it was really fun to watch. And like some of those guys that we talked about in the men's division where they didn't necessarily get high up in the rankings, but they still had some of our favorite skates. That's one that sticks out to me.
Well, let's finish this up with dance, which could qualify as a bit of an upset.
Well, we went to this both predicting that Chalk and Bates would be on top, but we knew that this was going to be hotly contested between them and Gillis and Poirier. The question is always at this point between these teams is that if they both skate totally clean, it's just kind of who do the judges want to win almost.
Yeah, because it's so negligible. It really is.
When you look at the top two here, I think that Piper and Paul winning the rhythm dance is absolutely justified. I do think it's just the better rhythm dance overall. Even as great as Chalk and Bates do theirs, I think that Gillis and Poirier's piece has more unity of theme that makes it easier to get into, that using all of those Beach Boys songs and playing the characters that they're doing in there, it works so well on them. It just plays to all their strengths. It's easier to engage with that one versus Maddie and Evan's rhythm dance that is more of a medley across a lot of pieces. And even though it's so technical and so brilliant, I think it just doesn't grab quite the same way. But you made a note that you looked at the protocols and you were able to see that Maddie got a call somewhere in that rhythm.
Yeah, she got a level 2 on the midline step sequence as opposed to Piper's 3. So, but Evan had gotten a 3. So she had obviously been downgraded. And that one level seemed to make up at least, if not the full point behind that they were, at least half of it. In ice dance, when you're talking about halves of points, that's unusual. It's so close between them. So that one level deduction, and to be fair, Maddie and Evan even said following the rhythm dance that they felt like they had their foot off the gas a little bit. Like they still had a wonderful time. They still looked amazing, but they weren't quite as open and free as they tend to be in that performance. It felt like a teeny tiny bit reserved.
I do definitely agree with that outcome after the rhythm. However, I think the free dance,
being as close as it was, didn't seem correct.
Right. Now,
yes, I
know going into this that, I have to recognize my own bias. If you've listened to the show for any length of time, I'm a huge Chalk and Bates fan, and that I often struggle to engage with Gillis and Poirier. Stylistically, there's an apples to oranges thing there that one team works for me and the other one doesn't. However, I've recognized through this whole season that Gillis and Poirier's free dance, even if I don't find the emotional connection to it that I want to, that it is a brilliantly constructed and performed program that is amazingly intricate. However, Chalk and Bates's Take 5 program is, I think, just one of the best ice dance programs I've ever seen. And I thought they performed it brilliantly here. And they did win the free dance. But when it all shakes out, they come out just half a point behind Gillis and Poirier. And I love that Chris, before the scores came out, he said, well, I don't know about you. I'm not going to do his accent here, but he's like, I don't know about you, but he's like, I think Chalk and Bates program just has more intricacy, more going on. It's more engaging. The story is clearer. And I just think it's a better program than Gillis and Poirier.
Yeah, I mean, that was essentially what he was saying. And he also said that he thought it was like a higher technical ceiling.
And again, Gillis and Poirier were absolutely terrific in the free dance.
Both teams were.
Those are nearly flawless programs. I just don't understand how, with a program as good as what Maddie and Evan delivered with that free dance, that they got edged out by half a point. It doesn't make sense to me there. And this is one of those places where it is ice dance. There is sort of that matter of preference. There is what the judges at this particular event liked. And I'm not mad about Gillis and Poirier winning a gold here, right? Because they are so good. And they have been so good, despite a couple of falls and stuff in the season. Otherwise, they have been so on point. But this is just one of those places where, looking at the scoring, I'm like, I've been in sort of a conversation with a few of our commenters in the YouTube comments about the need for ice dance to have more going on to differentiate the performances, because it does get to this point where all of the top teams are just so good that you have to just kind of look for the most nitpicky things in the world in order to differentiate. In all of the other disciplines, it is usually far clearer who's winning because of the way the technical elements are. And you don't want to necessarily change the nature of ice dance to reflect that, because it is very much its own thing. But it also just sort of becomes like ballroom dancing at a certain point, where it's like, is this a sport that you can score, or is it a art that you can judge? It just sometimes feels like the judges just felt today they just like this one better, right? And it's unsatisfying.
It was. I mean, I felt like either way, frankly, this could have fallen. It would have felt weird anyway. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I agree with you in the sense that the scoring is so muddy and doesn't always make sense. I'm probably preaching to the choir of people that are listening that know this and have felt it for years, but it feels frustrating as a fan to watch something and go, but I can see that one was better than the other. The person who is a skater commentating is basically telling me that he thinks one is better. And Chris's bias is still a bias. It's a more educated one maybe than mine. And then to see it come in so close, it does feel like it becomes, just as we've seen for so long in ice dance, it's a matter of who's got the wind in their sail today. We all know, if we have been watching ice dance for the past few years, that the podiums are pretty consistent. If Maddie and Evan and Piper and Paul and Marco and Charlene from Italy and, Lila and Lewis from Great Britain are at the same competition, the order will only change if there's an error or if they're trying to sway something. And I felt like this competition going to Piper and Paul was definitely I don't know that it's a sway towards them for Worlds. I feel like it was the ISU to a certain degree, and I'm going way conspiracy theory on this. Apologies.
Let's put on our tinfoil hats.
Yeah, seriously. But I do feel like it's let's keep things interesting win, because going into Worlds at home in Boston, Maddie and Evan had been kind of the clear favorites, I think, this season. And now that gets tossed into the air with them having been beaten by Piper and Paul by an edge, but it's still a win. And that leaves that question of what are we going to see in a month in Boston?
When you look at the other teams here, especially like in let's say the top 6, there is a distinct difference between Gillis and Poirier and Chalk and Bates than the rest of the field. It's a sort of je ne sais quoi kind of thing where like there's...
when you see it?
Right. And just both of them are so refined in a way that it's hard to articulate what it is until you watch it and you can just see it. However, there is some just big differences in the scoring that I don't always understand, particularly if you look at in the third place with Marjorie Lajoie and Zach Lagat, who come in here at a 201.04, which is like 16, 17 points behind Chalk and Bates. And let's be honest, not their best performances. We adore Lala. They are a great team. And there's plenty of other events where we really thought they should have been higher scored and higher up on the podium because they are just the perennial bronze. It feels like if they show up at one of these events and these other teams are going to be there, they're going to go into bronze. It's just the way the ice dance cookie crumbles. But they weren't perfect here. There were some holes in these programs.
Well, especially Marjorie's problem in the twizzles and the free dance. That was a major mistake.
Yes, that was a really messy twizzle that they didn't really seem to get called on in a meaningful way in the scoring. When there is so little room for error in these programs and performances within ice dance, and everything has to be scrutinized so heavily, this whole season, there's been places where I have thrown my hands up and been like, you'll nitpick everything, but then you'll just completely miss major bobbles. And it's happened this whole season long with various teams.
It happens every year.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
And this was a place where I was like, as much as I love this team, there are a couple of places where those programs don't look as good. And I can understand why they're as far back from the second place as they are, but I don't understand why they're a full 4 points ahead of Carrera and Ponomarenko in the fourth position.
I agree. There's been many times where I felt like Lajoie and Lagat should be in the same echelon as Gillis and Poirier, like for sure. This was not one of those competitions. I felt like their rhythm dance looked mostly super strong. Like, I don't really have much to say about that.
I actually thought that their rhythm dance looked a lot better because they moved a little bit away from that Austin Powers thematic.
Yeah.
Like, Zach had a whole new look for it, which
much
was
better,
significantly improved. But they also just tweaked that program so that it felt more like a time period thing than a pastiche of a film idea of a time period.
Yes, they took away some of the campiness that, while I enjoy camp in that particular situation, I think it was detrimental.
Yeah.
But the free dance, like, I've seen them do that in such a way where I'm mesmerized and can't think while I'm watching it. It's so good. This one looked tight by comparison. And that mistake, even, again, I keep leaning on Chris this time. Even he was like, doesn't look really like they're going to lose much of anything because of that mistake. And sounded confused as much as I was. As much as I love Marjorie, that needs to be called if we're playing fair.
Yeah.
Because Christina Carrera and Anthony Ponomarenko had just laid down an incredible free dance. And I think they should have been ahead of them. I know that in the rankings, that would not make sense by ice dance standards. But on that day, I think they earned it. So it's a little frustrating.
And Christina Carrera did have her own bobble at the very end of their free dance.
Fair, but that was a very different kind of bobble.
Yes, it wasn't a non-element. It was just a finishing move. And
it was the end pose, essentially.
Yes, and she lost her balance and had the face of somebody that had the, oh God, what's happening? And
Anthony caught her.
Anthony caught her and just pulled her in, and they finished up strong. And it was just this sort of funny moment. It was funny watching them in the kiss and cry after they watched the replay and their whole team's laughing at it. But overall, I did think there were stronger programs than what Lejoie and Lega had here. I think there's some times where that Carmen free skate has maybe been a little bit more striking this season than it was here, but I still think that they were just two very well delivered programs. I just don't understand that difference in scoring between them.
And I think the one that seemed in sitting with you and watching that you were more upset about was actually Amelia Zinkis and Vadim Kolznik, where I feel like they felt underscored, particularly in that free dance. Like I was a little, as much as I could tell, they were a little surprised by the scoring.
Yeah, I don't get that scoring at all. I don't understand why they were 11 points back from Carrera and Ponomarenko. They've been so much closer through the rest of the season, and I'd have to go through the protocols and see if they just got knocked down on a ton of levels or something, but they've been so strong this season, and it feels like the last couple of competitions, they've definitely had some struggles as far as just being sort of exhausted at some of the events and just trying to keep it put all together. I do think it's funny that pretty much immediately after they were done with the competition, Vadim went right out and got a haircut. Like he was done with his rhythm dance hair and he was ready to streamline it again. But yeah, seeing their faces in the scoring afterwards, you could tell that they were displeased with what they got and didn't know why they got it. And I'm right there with them. I didn't get it.
It reminded me a lot, actually, of what we were seeing with Caroline Green and Michael Parsons last season, where they would skate brilliantly and then sit in the kiss and cry while they'd get scores that probably just made no sense to them. They're like, we're doing everything you're telling us to do. Where are these errors that are dropping us this far back? I forgot to mention that they actually took silver in ice dance at the Road to 26. So I'm excited to see them at Worlds, Caroline Green and Michael Parsons. But Zingis and Kolznik being this far back really seemed off. I agree. I have seen that these programs a little better this season for sure, have a little more energy. That said, I don't think that they were 12 points back from Carrera and Ponomarenko weaker.
Yeah, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. If there was a rise here that made me super happy to see here in Korea was the Korean team of Hana Lim and Ye Kwan. Obviously, they're faves of ours. We've loved them since the last World Team Trophy when they first appeared on the senior scene. This whole season, though, has not looked as great for them. Their programs just hadn't quite gelled and weren't working as well, and judges just weren't enjoying them as much, obviously, because scores-wise, they were just drifting further down. They very clearly made some strategic changes to these programs. Going into that rhythm dance, Hana had a new outfit, and they had tweaked some of the layout of that a little bit, I think.
They must have.
Because it definitely worked a lot better. They introduced a new lift into that Cruella de Vil free skate that was definitely a showstopper, crowd-pleasing moment. And that whole program just felt so different than it had previously. It suddenly worked after being kind of iffy through a lot of the season.
It was such an improvement and just such a, honestly, kind of a relief to see because they were so brilliant last season. And this season, always feeling like they had taken an ever so slight step backwards. Seeing them here, I'm like, nope, they're good. It more feels now like it's a material problem than a them problem. And I'm very relieved to see it. So 6th place here with really good scores and just getting to come out and show up that way in Korea with all the flags and the crowd. I don't know. It was just very, very sweet and lovely. And I just can't wait to see what we get from them in the future.
I also want to shout out the free dance from Australia's Holly Harris and Jason Chan. I am traditionally kind of lukewarm on this team. I think they're a talented team that never seems to quite differentiate themselves from the middle of the pack. I think that they always just kind of sit in that soggy middle space of teams who are good, but not quite good enough to get higher up at these competitions. And I was really taken with their free dance here. It was a completely different level of performance from them than I've seen before. I know that Chris, the ISU commentator, was also absolutely thrilled with it. There's a great lift at the end that is maybe the best thing I've ever seen them do. I was very impressed. They were not scored the way that they deserved to be in that program, and it was clear they all felt that way afterwards. I don't get it, but I think that is the first program I've seen from that team that has made me stop and go, okay, now I'm kind of excited to see what you do next, because that's where the promise of that partnership really started to show up for me.
And that kind of goes back to the point of if you're a team that is perceived to not, in quotes, deserve the score yet, you won't get it.
Yeah.
It's reputation and momentum and things outside of your control, unfortunately, influence a lot of your placements at these events for ice dance. And it happens in every discipline, but absolutely the most here. And I felt the most impact of it here that I've felt in quite a while.
And then from there on out, from like 8th to 12th, you see a lot of teams that are all within about 10 points of each other. And here's where we saw more mistakes and, little errors that like a couple of falls, things that kind of knock people down. However, there's just a lot of young teams here, like Japan's Yoshida and Morita, or China's Zhao and He. I really like a lot, and I'm looking forward to seeing a lot more from them. And all of these teams kind of through here. I mean, we see Fabri and Air, who are, generally speaking, I would have expected to be a little higher here, but they did have a fall in the rhythm dance.
Yeah.
That unfortunately knocked them down and kind of kept them stuck in the lower ranks here. But anyway, all of these teams through here, I think there's a lot of talent coming up, and it's just probably going to be a couple of years for them. I mean, you look at Tracy Zhao and Jasper He, they're 17, right? And
yeah, they're babies.
in the one discipline, other than maybe pairs, where being that young is more of a detriment, they need some time to grow. Or like the Chinese team of Junfei Ren and Zhening Xing, they landed pretty low in 12th here, but are still a team that I like a lot. And I felt were a little underscored in what they were doing here. So I think there's a ton of upcoming talent that's lower in the ranking here that we're just not really going to see to come to fruition for a couple of years, particularly in the hierarchy nature of this sport. But also all of them just have a lot of refinement to do, but they're young teams. And I think they're sort of next quadrennial teams.
Exactly. Well, that brings us to our favorite segment, Gold in Our Heart. And this feels like a foregone conclusion.
It's real easy.
It's real easy, but I'll ask anyway. Who's gold in your heart?
It's Jimmy Ma.
Of course it's Jimmy Ma.
It's Jimmy Ma. Yes.
Jimmy Ma.
Jimmy Ma getting on the podium, really fulfilling that promise that he's had all along, but it has struggled to put together, having two really strong skates, doing it under extreme circumstances and doing it in honor of the people from his club, and just delivering programs that I think are going to be very memorable, especially for him. I mean, those are big moments for Jimmy out there, but that clearly resonated through the skating community. And then, man, I could watch that gala skate from him all day. So good. The crowd absolutely loved it. I mean, I felt like he cemented himself as a Korean audience favorite by coming out there and skating to Psy and really giving something that like culturally hit hard there. All the way around, just brilliant work from Jimmy Ma.
I'm just so happy for him. I don't want to add too much more than that. He did a really amazing job, and I could not be more happy for him. So that's all I'll say.
Overall, I really enjoyed Four Continents. There were so many great performances, so many highlights, all the way from top of the podium performances to people who didn't land in the top 10, but were still some of my favorite skates. There's a ton of people who did great stuff here that we didn't even talk about because, I mean, we've been recording for an hour and a half at this point, and there's still so much more you could cover because there was a lot of just great stories here. It seemed like the skaters were having an awesome time.
Yes.
I loved seeing a lot of their like Instagram videos from the people who were hanging out in the stands together. You had a lot of the international skaters who were just sort of like partying together in the stands and coming out to support their fellow skaters in the other disciplines, which is always wonderful to see.
Yes, but also exploring Seoul, which is exactly what I would be doing if I were them.
Yeah.
You got sent to one of the coolest, most interesting cities in the world. Take advantage of it and go hang out. And you could tell that looking at the social media accounts, the crowds inside the stadium were great, but there were crowds outside of the stadium as well. Like, it was just obviously a very fun environment to get to go and participate in.
Yeah, it also seemed like there were a lot of, I don't know if they were impromptu or not, but sort of like signing lines where you had skaters who came out into the audience to watch stuff and then ended up with like lines of people to getting autographs and photos with them. Somebody showed at one point this like big doubled up line to meet Miura Stuff like that is really fun. And I'm so jealous of everybody who got to hang out in Seoul during this event, because everything that I was seeing from their photos, the stuff they were sharing, it just looks so fascinating and so fun and so colorful. And overall, I just think it was really an event to remember. A lot of great takeaways and really offers some perspective going into Worlds, considering a lot of top competitors from the men's and women's event weren't here, and they should be nervous after this event.
Agreed. Well, next week, we will be talking a little bit about the World Junior Championships. Also, there is the benefit event coming up that is to support the families and the clubs that were most affected by the plane crash a few weeks ago in the U.S. So we'll definitely be watching that and hope you will too. I'm sure it's going to be a very emotional weekend watching that for sure.
In the meantime, let us know in the comments wherever you're at. If you're here on YouTube, give us a like, get us a subscribe. It's so YouTubey to say this, and I apologize to everybody who listens to us on other podcast platforms and has to hear that. But I will note that on YouTube, we just crossed the threshold of like 900 subscribers. In YouTube parlance, the important threshold is 1,000 subscribers. Like, that's really helpful for the growth of your channel to hit that number. So if you are a listener to us, but you haven't yet subscribed and you just kind of find us algorithmically, or you know other people who are fans of skating who might like this show that you could share it with, if you could hit that subscribe, or if you could share it with other people and help us get across that line, that would help us tremendously. I hate being the person that YouTubey and begging for the likes and subscribes, because it's so irritating in an age where,
especially whenever there's Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all of that. And we love you too.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing, because while our YouTube audience is larger, we do have those listeners on those other platforms. So we're not neglecting you. It's just louder and easier to see it all on YouTube. But regardless of all that, wherever you're able to leave a comment, which you can do on YouTube or Spotify. I don't think Apple allows that really, but you can really only do it in reviews, and we don't tend to actually see those. But anyway, let us know what your impression was of this event, how you felt about the scoring, who was gold in your hearts, all of those impressions from this event, and what that has you feeling in the lead up to Worlds, because I think things just got real interesting after this one. And especially when we get into our Worlds preview, I think that we're going to be feeling the ramifications of this event.
Oh, big time.
Yeah. So like Wendy said, when we come back, we'll be talking about World Juniors a bit and that memorial event. And for Scoreography, I'm Adrian Buskey.
And I'm Wendy Buskey.
And we will talk to you next time.
Bye.